When you ask a question and get an answer, that's pretty helpful. When you get several people with the same answer, that builds confidence. But when everyone all the time gives the same answer with no variation, to me that sounds like an entrenched idea that nobody has ever considered and just goes along with what the last person said. So when I started looking for models to make Cossack cavalry for bolt action, specifically World War II, I was slightly annoyed that there was only one answer coming out. So hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and today I'm going to look at that common answer, but I'm also going to have a look at some variations of that answer. The only way that anyone seems to suggest to make World War II era Cossacks is with the Perry Miniatures American Civil War Cavalry, a plastic kit, and you cut them to swap the torso for a bolt action torso, usually the Soviet Union. And then you can add a 3D printed papaka hat, and you've got yourself a World War II Cossack. The miniatures from the Perrys are excellent quality, and that's no surprise from the Perry brothers. And that's a sign that we're onto a good idea. But the American Civil War is quite a bit before World War II, so how does the equipment compare? Well, I looked at the horses first, and to my untrained eye, this style of horse straps, reins and stuff, whatever it's supposed to be called, it looks very similar to photos of World War II era cavalry, including the Cossacks. But like I say, I'm not really a horse person, so I might not be able to spot the differences. The horses themselves are in two pieces, and you can mix and match to an extent to get different poses. However, not every combination of left and right halves work, so do check before you glue them together. These horses are really nice. Now, I don't do cavalry very much, so I can't really do a proper comparison, but they are very nice. For the riders, if we go with the suggested method, I only need the legs, so let's look at that. The rider's legs have a fairly neutral design of trouser, a sword moulded onto the left leg, which is good because the Cossacks have cavalry sabres. And then when we get to the belt line, we have the one thing that's not quite an issue, but something you need to consider. To swap the torso, we need to cut either at the top line of the belt or the bottom line of the belt, depending on how you want to do it. And we cut the other model in the same place. But here, there's a pack on the back of the belt, and the left arm that's holding the reins is moulded over where the belt is. And this is just going to make it a little bit fiddly to separate the model cleanly, and we'll probably need some milliput work or just some pouches glued over the gap to hide that. And that's probably not a big deal. The usual donor model would be either a Soviet Army Summer or German Heer Summer model, to represent the Cossacks that joined those forces and used their uniforms. But I will be making a unit with mixed equipment. I'll explain why later on. For now, I have strangely an American Marine model, and that's simply because it's the only bolt action model I have left over. So the process is to choose where to cut the models, and you should cut them both in the same place. And once they're cut, you swap the parts over and glue them together. On the Marine sprue, I have one set of arms with a Springfield 1903 with the bayonet fitted. Again, I'll explain why later on. And because I used this particular set of arms, I had to position the torso twisted to make both the pose look good, which I think it does, and also to not interfere with the horse's head. The last piece to complete the conversion is the head and the famous papaka hat. I found on Thingiverse Maxim V13, who posted these Cossack heads, and whilst the neck isn't quite the same style as the Warlord kind of necks, this does fit well enough on the American torso. And I might have to do some sculpting on this model to hide the oddness around the neck, but it serves perfectly well as an example for this video. And this is a pretty good conversion method. You would of course choose the uniform that suits the specific unit that you wanted to make. The cutting isn't that difficult even with a craft knife, although one of those thin hobby saws would be make that a lot easier. I should probably get one of those because I would definitely make use of it. And the model does look the part, certainly. However, what if you, like me, are making a different group of Cossacks? The Cossacks are a people with many hundreds of years of history in a region from Ukraine all the way to the far reaches of China. They were a refuge to peoples escaping empires and themselves joined in on the side of the oppressors. By World War II, where I will be depicting them, they had been suffering from the de-Cossackification from the Soviet Union, which pretty much sounds like cultural genocide to me. But some of the groups of Cossacks still sided with the Soviets in a perceived duty for their fellow people, others sided with Germany or Italy, and many stayed out of the fighting, and even some more as partisans or bandits. And that's more what I'm going to lean into as a practical point. If I make them without any specific army's uniform, I can use them in my Soviet army, or my German army, or my Italian army, without really squinting too hard. They're just a small band who joined in on the fighting on an ad hoc basis, rather than formally joining one side or another. And at that point, I can look at the torso of the American Civil War models from Perry. Maybe I don't need to cut them in half at all. The tunic or shirt that they're wearing is a really neutral style, and the left arm is positioned perfectly for holding the reins, and they already have heads fitted. All I need to do is find a right arm holding a rifle, and then add a papaka to the head. And to make that really easy, the American Civil War has an open right hand on the sprue. So I just use that holding a Carcano rifle from the Italians that I was building recently, and I put some Carcano rifle ammo on his chest. And even easier, Maxim V13 included a separate papaka that I printed about 90% scale, which went on the Perry head with just a tiny bit of shaving. And this makes the conversion phenomenally easy, pretty much just gluing some bits together with almost no cutting or fitting at all. For me, this is perfect, and I'll make a few of them in a similar way. But for anyone making a uniformed model, I had another idea that would make the cutting easier. This is the Perry Napoleonic Heavy Cavalry Sprue. You can get this separately under the name Cuirassier Command Sprue, or in a larger box. What drew me to this was that the riders' legs are separate from the torsos. But let's look at the horses first. One of them is similar to the American Civil War horses, but the other one has a lot more fur on it. Now for me that's fantastic as it adds variety, but it actually isn't good for someone making a uniformed unit, as this extraneous fluff might not fit that look. But I took one of my Italian bodies from the Wargames Atlantic sprue, hacked that in half in very much the same way as I did for the American, and this is a lot easier than cutting both models and trying to get it to line up. Just have to cut one model and make it match the legs. I also found that the Wargames Atlantic slightly smaller models than the bulky Warlord Games models did fit the Perry Miniatures legs a little better. As I'm using an Italian torso, I use Italian arms with another Carcano, but for the head, well, that took the most effort of this conversion. The Wargames Atlantic heads are separate, but are moulded with the helmets on, and so I had to cut the helmet off of the head when it's this tiny little piece. Well, I lost one of them, it pinged away into the stratosphere, but the second attempt I managed to get to cut and glued the papaka on. Overall, this is a much easier way of doing the conversion because you only have to cut one model, but if you were using Warlord Games Soviet or Germans, it would make dealing with the head a little bit easier. Now, whilst I use the Cuirassier sprue, if you go through every single sprue of cavalry on the Perry Miniatures website, you would probably find a set that has both good horses and saddles that suit the era, but also two-piece riders that make the torso swap easier. However, this got me a thinking. Because I was looking at all these Napoleonic models, I went looking at other Napoleonic models, and maybe the equipment and style can either be converted or just is close enough to not worry about it. And whilst I was doing that, I found some metal Napoleonic era Cossacks. Now, why the heck does nobody talk about the actual Cossack models from Perry Miniatures models when talking about making Cossack models from Perry Miniatures models by using the American Civil War models instead? Well, just for the sake of variety, I got one set of the metal Perry Cossacks, and I realised that the models, for me, are absolutely perfect, but they're not going to be perfect for everyone. The leader has a sabre pointed out dramatically, which got squashed in transport. I did manage to gently bend it back into shape, but if it does get damaged again, I can replace it with the American Civil War sabre, as the style is very similar. These models are exceptionally stylish, very much fitting the Cossack clothing style, but that also means they aren't wearing uniforms. And so if you wanted to make a uniformed Cossack unit, these are not going to be a particularly good choice. However, for the type of unit that I want to make, as I explained earlier, absolutely perfect. The lances are even a separate piece, and so I just have to glue a rifle into the hands. One of them got a Mauser, one with a Mosin. And for me, these models needed no other conversion at all. Even though they're Napoleonic era, over 100 years before the era I'm representing, they fit close enough and are exceptionally stylish for the Cossack style of dress. And so my unit is most of the way built now. I'm picking up some bits tomorrow to give the last ones a Lee Enfield and an Arisaka, and I've mixed the rifles from all over the place, Kokano, Mauser, Mosin, Springfield, as these just are the rifles they've managed to collect together with enough ammunition to use. Because this is not a unit that has joined one army or another, and so they've never been issued rifles, just like they've never been issued uniforms. Now I would expect that Mosins would be the most common. The Cossacks are so close to the Soviet Union and Russia throughout most of their history. In reality, they would probably stick to just one or two types to save on having many different types of ammo, rather than 5 or 6, but this unit isn't particularly historically accurate in a lot of other ways as well, and I'm aiming to at least make it more stylish than maybe it is historical. And to lean even more in that direction, I'm probably going to have to break out some Milliput at some point, fill in the gaps, and sculpt a lot of fancy details. But for the moment, for this video, I'm going to leave it there, and I'll come back in a separate video with some sculpting, as all of that will take a very long time. So do post suggestions below, particularly for artwork that will work as inspiration. But for now, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.